The sexualization of male clothing, for want of a better word, has taken over to such an extent that not only is the figure shown, but the skirt of the tunic is coming right up the leg. And there's one commentator in 1370 who says, men's clothes have become so short you can see their buttocks. Hello, I'm Ian Mortimer, and my theme is life in medieval England. I'm going to tell you about life in medieval England in a rather strange way, by employing an A to Z format, because I want to get away from the normal formats of themes and all that's most important. So I'm going to give you some big themes. You will hear about the Black Death later on, and you will hear about medieval violence, but you're also going to hear about toilet paper and things like that. I'm going to surprise you with my A to Zs. First of all, I need to tell you though how I'm going to approach this subject of medieval. The Middle Ages are generally taken to start with the fall of the Roman Empire in the late 5th century and to continue until the Renaissance period around 1500. 1,000 years. You cannot pretend that life at the start of that period was anything like life at the end of that period. So in approaching medieval England, I focus on the 14th century, and I do that for several reasons. Kings, knights, battles, nuns, friars, all these things are present in the 14th century. And so are things like plague, and most importantly of all, documents. We have the evidence to talk about life in the 14th century with confidence that we really are getting it right. And also, the 14th century gives you a sense of something containable, large enough to show change, but small enough you can actually imagine and say, it was like this. Why animals? Surely you're thinking animals haven't changed very much since the Middle Ages. Animals have changed hugely, and this is why I want to introduce the whole theme with animals. And if you go to my local livestock market in Exeter and you look at the weight of a cow being sold today, it will weigh somewhere between £1,280 and £1,900. If you went to that same livestock market in 1300, the cow would weigh probably £434. That's the average. How do I know this? If you take a cow, cut off the hide, cut off the horns, cut off the hooves, gut it, you'll end up with 5/8 of its weight. And if you then dress that weight for the meat, you'll end up with a 5/8 again. So a £1,280 cow, the lightest one you'd get in Exeter, would end up with 500 pounds of beef. In 1300, we know that you could get about 170 pounds of beef off a cow. Hence, they weighed about 434, 435 pounds when running around. A third of the size of the smallest one today, a quarter of the size of the largest one today. In fact, if you look at the record for the local cattle, 4,400 pounds in weight are the biggest. So a medieval cow was 1/10 of the size of the largest modern ones. That would surprise you when you're looking in the fields. And you'd see the same thing for the sheep. A medieval sheep, 28 pounds in weight, that's half the weight of a modern lamb when it goes to market, 1/10 of the weight of the biggest ones. So when you be looking round medieval England in the fields, you see much smaller animals. It's not just the people in medieval England who will surprise you, it's the animals too. Buttons. Why buttons? Because I bet you've never thought of the button as being an invention that really changed society. Now, the ancient Romans had buttons. They were invented millennia ago, and then they were lost, they were forgotten, so that if you were in England in 1300, you would not have been wearing buttons. If you were a very wealthy, fashionable lady and you wanted to show off your figure, It was possible, but you had to be sewn into your dress. Most people had their clothes made of two pieces of fabric, the front with the sleeves and the back sewn together. All very well, but you have to have enough room to be able to wriggle your arm into the sleeve if you want to put on your own clothes, as virtually everybody did. So therefore, everything hangs from your shoulders and everything is brought into the body through belts and ties like that. In the 1320s, and we can't be sure whether it's in London or Paris, but somebody invents a garment called a cotehardie. Now, cotehardie is like a coat that comes round you, but is buttoned up at the front. This invention of the button, or this rediscovery of the button, is transformative because now people can inexpensively have clothing that hugs the body. In the 1330s, 1340s, fashion, especially for men, comes on in leaps and bounds, and figure-hugging clothes become all the rage. By the 1370s, the sexualization of male clothing, for want of a better word, has taken over to such an extent that not only is the figure shown, but the skirt of the tunic is coming right up the leg. And there's one commentator in 1370 who says, men's clothes have become so short you can see their buttocks. Honestly, was quite appalled by this. But society is actually really energized by the sexualization of clothing as a result of the button. The only part of society that really isn't excited by this is the clergy. Sexualization of their clothing is not one of their priorities, so they stick with their old gowns flowing from their shoulders. But the rest of society really takes this new fashion on board. When we think of medieval times, we don't necessarily think of great inventions, great scientific discoveries, yet they do take place in the 14th century. And just think about time. How would it be to live your life today if we did not have a clock, if we couldn't tell the time? You might be thinking, oh, I don't know when to turn on the television, but your second thought will be, well, actually, the television wouldn't exist, would it? Because you can't have scientific experimentation without a means of measuring time. Most of our society fundamentally depends on how we tell the time. Now, if you go back to the early 14th century, how are you going to tell the time? Well, some manor houses will have sundials, but basically everybody is still telling the time in the same way that the ancient Greeks and ancient Egyptians did, which is to divide the day into 24 hours, 12 hours of darkness and 12 hours of light. That means your hour of daylight in summer is twice as long as your hour of daylight in winter. Even if you've got an hourglass, you're not going to be able to tell time very well. You can't time how long you're going to leave your loaf in the oven, for example. So this is just an inadequate way of telling the time, and people know it. But how do you measure time? Given the importance of time, it really amuses me that in about 1332, Edward III, this great king, goes to St Albans Abbey and he meets a man called Richard of Wallingford, who is designing the first mechanical clock to be built in England. And Edward III's comment to him was, he should find something more constructive to do with his time. What an irony. Anyway, in the end, Edward III realises he's got it all wrong, and he does actually employ Italian clockmakers to come over to England and build mechanical clocks in Windsor Castle, Westminster Palace, Queenborough Castle, and King's Langley. So these four royal palaces are given clock time, which means every hour is the same length, which means bells ring on the hours and people do things according to clock time, the time of the clock or of the bell. The whole royal household becomes regulated. And everybody realises this is a far better way of organising their time, so that cathedrals start using clocks. Salisbury had one installed in 1386, Wells Cathedral in 1397. Small towns start having clocks. Barnstable in North Devon has one by the end of the 14th century. So everybody starts thinking, we can regulate by the hour of the bell. I'll meet you at 5 of the bell. Clock time is a production of the 14th century. You simply cannot avoid the dead in medieval England. The dead are all around you. Medieval society thinks of people, everybody who's ever existed, as being in one long procession towards heavenly salvation. Now, if you're very good, if you're a saint, you go straight to heaven when you die. There is no pause. For the majority of people, though, as a result of the doctrine of purgatory, people believe you go to purgatory when you die. Purgatory is like a holding bay where people will pause before they either go to heaven or to hell after a certain period of time. Think of it in terms of everybody processing towards heavenly salvation, and when they die, it's just they're out of sight, as if they've gone round a corner or over the brow of a hill. The reason it works so well is because people who are alive pray for those who are in purgatory, who can have words with the saints who are also dead, who can then intercede on your behalf. So praying for somebody else's soul can end up benefiting you. Therefore, there's this constant relationship with the dead, especially your own ancestors, of course. Then there's the matter of relics. You'll be aware that relics of saints exist in churches all over Europe. And people make pilgrimages to these relics, and they pay large amounts of money for all the pewter badges and paraphernalia that goes along with being a pilgrim, to be in the presence of the remains of a saint. Monasteries vie for having these relics, and sometimes go to, well, spend a lot of money and also go to extraordinary lengths to get the relics. So people have a cult of actually being near the dead. If you are going to make an oath, making an oath on some holy relics is an especially powerful way of doing it, and obviously it impresses the person to whom you're making that oath that you are serious. But things do get a bit out of hand, I have to say. For example, in the 13th century, it's reported that there are 3 heads of John the Baptist to which you might make a pilgrimage. Which one is the genuine one is anybody's guess, and my guess is that none of them are. You will also find that people have a fascination with anything to do with Christ for obvious reasons. But this means you can't go and see Christ's relics because he took his bones with him to heaven, but you can see the things that logically he would have left behind, like his blood or his sweat or his milk teeth. And most extraordinarily of all, well, not quite most extraordinary of all, but pretty extraordinarily, there are 12 churches across Europe that claim to have Christ's foreskin. And probably the most remarkable thing of all is there is a church in Rome to which you can make a pilgrimage, where they will show you Christ's umbilical cord. Now, I've heard from the Bible about wise men turning up with gold, frankincense and myrrh. I've never read about them departing with the umbilical cord. That concludes my first little instalment of my A to Z. In the next instalment, you're going to hear about E, F, G and H. I wonder if you can guess what I'm going to choose for those letters, but you can't guess what G will be.